if you'd like to listen to me discuss some of my thoughts on the very polemic and controversial issue of screen time, stay tuned on this video. My name is Barbara Fernandez. I am a speech-language pathologist and also the developer of over 60 apps for the iPad on the App Store. All of my apps have been developed as a tool to promote speech, language, or communication in children, as well as some apps for promoting social skills in kids with autism. I know that the subject of screen time is one of the most controversial topics that I actually do enjoy discussing. Generally, I stay away from controversial subjects, but I feel that when we speak our truth and what we really believe, this is the only way to spread different views and perceptions to probably bring people to have more common sense when it comes to discussions around screen time. So first, let me try to define what is screen time. Screen time, I'm referring to screen time here very generally, which is any time that any individual, children or adult, spend in front of any screen. This could be the time that people spend in front of their phones or an iPad or in front of the TV, watching a movie, going to the movie theater. All of these different kinds of exposure and time in front of any type of these different screens is considered a screen time. Now that we've talked about the definition of screen time, it is very important to bring important aspect of screen time. As an app developer, I am mostly focused on screen time when it comes to using mobile technology. With the growth of mobile technology in the last 10 years, we've seen a bigger increase of mobile technologies being used by children of all age ranges, starting as young as under 1 year old. And this has a lot of scientists and researchers or professionals concerned about whether or not these different mobile technologies are impacting the development of these children. I decided to look up what the research actually says. Over the last several years, I've stayed tuned to what comes out of the research on screen time. A lot of the screen time research doesn't separate mobile devices from regular television, which I consider passive time. I like to separating screen time, even on mobile devices, from active screen time versus passive screen time. So if a child is on an iPad watching YouTube, I would consider the use of that mobile device the same as the use of a television. Be it an iPhone or an iPad, if they're using passively to watch videos, I see no difference between a mobile device, a computer, or a television. I recently came back from the National Speech, Hearing, and Language Association convention that happens yearly. This is a event that gathers tens of thousands of speech-language pathologists. Some of them are researchers and presenting on the subject they're researchers. Some are giving presentation on specific topics. Because I am usually at the exhibit hall at my booth, I don't get to go to a lot of sessions, but I did make a point to go on the very first day to a session about screen time. I enjoy going to these sessions because it gives me the people who are very much against screen time and how they perceive the negative effects of screen time. One thing that it was very interesting to me and caught my attention in that session was a quote that the presenter brought up about how from Plato and his analogy of the invention of books and print, and how that could potentially negatively impact memory. The presenter brought up how research has shown that memory skills have decreased over time in humans. Humans used to be able to memorize entire Greek Odysseys, and recite them over generations. These days, we can't hardly remember the phone numbers of our family. And Plato, in this particular quote, was listing the negative effects of print. When you imagine what could have happened if we decided to stick to the fears of memory loss and avoided print, writing books, and anything written altogether to record history, what we have gained over the last hundreds of years in history and knowledge and perspective taken, because we are able to read what other people write and understand history, in my opinion, significantly outweighs the possible negative effects of us no longer having the memory capacity to remember the entire Greek Odyssey. Now, I'm talking about this because it's very easy for people who are anti-technology to start listing the negative effects of technology as a justification for us to completely stop using technology or avoid it at all costs. We should avoid technology if we see any negative effect. And I want to pause here to make sure that I am not agreeing or saying that there is, or stating specifically, any negative effect of technology quite yet. I'll get to that a little later. I'm just considering the possibility that just like print and our ability to record history over time has possibly reduced our memory skills, because now we can write instead of having to remember facts and information, how the benefits of utilizing the invention of writing and print to the masses significantly outweighs any negative effects of our possible reduction in memory over the last hundreds of years. When we talk about the negative effects of technology, it's very important to note that there is a big difference between the negative effects of technology in the brains of developing children, as well as the negative effects of technology in everyday adults with forming brain. So, with all of this said, I do want to bring out some of the research that I have been able to pull out on screen time. All right, since I'm bringing up research and I don't want to misquote any of the data, I have my iPad here with me, and I'm going to be reading through an article that is actually a collection of various research on screen time on children. It's from journalistresource.org, and it lists some of the most recent research on screen time. And the very first interesting number is that 63% of kids in the US spend over 2 hours a day on screen. But I didn't say a very key word here. They spend 63% on recreational screen time. They didn't even look at the educational time. I do want to talk about, and this is the point that I do want to make, is there is a big difference between spending time on the screen as recreational time versus educational time. With my own children, I make sure that the significant majority, probably 95%, if not more, of the time that my children are in front of a mobile device, it is for educational purpose with some kind of built-in recreational reward, but it's always educational in one way or the other. When we're talking about young children, avoiding as much as possible or moving towards a more educational-centered screen time where you get benefits that could possibly outweigh the negative of that time on the screen is very important. And this is what I try to do with my own children. Now, the very first data that they talk about is they had a sample of 2,000 kids, so that is a significant number of children in Canada. And they were including screen time here, TV, DVD, video game, computer, so all types of screen time. And they showed a significant increase in behavior problems at 5 years for kids that is spent more than 2 hours on screen. They had more behavior problems such as anxiety and depression. For the purpose of this video, we don't have time to go through all of the research that I have access to, but I did want to point out one particular research, which is a systematic review. What does a systematic review does? The systematic review looks at a lot of research that has been published on the subject, and they try to come up to a conclusion combining various research. And it was a meta-analysis and focused with a large sample. And there overall it did not find an association between overall screen time and academic performance. One of the big things that we see and people are afraid of is changes in behavior, changes in language development, and changes in academic performance. Now, after they've done this, the meta-analysis with a subject of over 100,000 participants, they did not find any influence of screen time in academic performance. Now, some of the other research is looking at language skills and behavior. Now, there's a lot that I could go on when it comes to language and as well as it comes to behavior. One of the things that I always like to people to keep in mind is which came first, the chicken or the egg. It's a very typical behavior now that I have friends and that I observe parents, and this is completely anecdotal, is if children are having more behavioral issues, parents tend to hand a device over to the child as, with the pacifier effect. So if children is, let's say, at a restaurant, and the children already have a behavioral issue, some parents, I'm saying all parents, some parents' behavior these days is to hand over a device with a pacifier effect. Now, did that iPad create the behavioral issue? Not necessarily. Maybe what the pacifying behavior of the iPad is doing is removing the opportunity that parents may have to address that behavior as opposed to pacifying the behavior. Now, and this might lead to the wrong assumption that these kids who are spending more time on the screen and the iPad is being to blame for the cause of the behavior. Not an association between kids that misbehave or don't behave like the norm with screen time. And this is something that I have observed from parents over and over again. Not to say that the screen time is causing them misbehavior, but that parents are using screen time as a pacifier for kids with some behavior concerns. One thing that it came to my mind is the relationship with reading books and people who are introverts. I've never seen any discussion over people who read too much. If people are introverts by nature, they enjoy reading books, sometimes they want to spend their entire weekend at home reading a book as opposed to socializing with friends or family. It was not the book that caused them to be introverts, to not want to hang out with other people necessarily, to prefer to spend some time on their own, which a lot of the times is my case. Books didn't cause that. It is my internal desire for a particular activity that led me to spend more time doing that activity. Obviously, screens, because they're highly entertaining, they are much more interesting to children than reading. And again, this is a big generalization that doesn't apply to everybody. Finally, before I close on my screen time controversial post today, I did want to bring out, and this mostly I see from a professionals in general, speech language pathologists, who are recommending to turn off the screen. I have been preaching, let's help parents have quality screen time, as opposed to telling them to turn off their screens. Screen time shaming isn't going to solve the problem that kids are needing co-viewing and co-playing with a parent on the iPad. Helping parents find apps that are more educational and having benefits during that screen time is a much more worthy cause that I am willing to partake today than telling parents to turn off the screen. And finally, it's all about balance, you guys. Let's have some common sense. Spending 10 hours a day reading a book every day of the week is not healthy. Spending 10 hours in front of a screen, if you add 3 hours watching a movie, 3 hours on playing a game, in the end of the day, you are not having quality time to spend doing other activities. In the end, it's all about having common sense, priorities, and us as professionals knowing how to properly advise parents how they can do better without shaming them on their child's use of screen time. It's always about quality, co-viewing, co-playing with your child, which also gives you that interaction that kids desperately need at that age. Thank you so much for watching, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know that it's a very controversial subject and that I could spend an entire hour here on this video and this subject, but it's something that I'm very passionate and I wanted to put my words out there. I hope you consider that ultimately families have a choice, and understanding family dynamics is extremely important in knowing what kinds of recommendation make sense to each family. Thank you guys. Bye.